Greetings, everyone. We are delighted that you are here, and I am welcoming you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Delaware. My name is Linda Barnett. I am chairperson of the Advocacy Corps, and it is the Advocacy Corps that is basically sponsoring this event today. We are pleased to share our legislative priorities with you in hopes that you will use this information to do your own advocacy as the General Assembly kicks into action. You can certainly watch for action alerts from us as really high priority bills come up for consideration. So be sure to watch for that. We do ask that you remain on mute so that we don't have outside noise interfering with our speakers. I did put my email address in the chat box so that if you have any questions about any of this discussion, be sure to send me an email so that we can get back to you with responses. If you have questions, though, for the full group as we go along, please put them in the chat box and we will try to address them as time permits. Did I say that we were recording this? I think I did. And we will be putting that into our YouTube channel after the event so that you can watch it again, and those who are not able to attend can watch it there as well. We'd like to begin with our first presenter, our first topic area, which is climate change, and I will turn it over to Peggy Schultz.
Thank you, Linda. Our portfolio is all about mitigating the results of climate change. That is, we want to head off at the gap these adverse effects of climate change before they do irreparable damage to the world's ecosystem. So we have 5 bullet points here, and only 2 have specific filed legislation at this point. But of course, we're very early in this legislative half session. A legislative session in Dover, as you may know, extends for 2 years, and the second half of the 153rd session began this week. A huge influx of huge data centers has captured the attention of most of our Delaware legislators. We all enjoy the almost unlimited access to the world's knowledge which these centers provide. But people who have lived near data centers find that they're not usually very good neighbors. The reason this committee is concerned with them is that they use an enormous amount of energy. The Project Washington data center proposed for Newcastle County needs a capacity of 1.2 gigawatts of electricity. At peak winter demand, the entire state of Delaware needs a capacity of 2.4 gigawatts. That's double what this project is requiring. So this is a big drain on a commodity which is already not nearly as robust in supply as it ought to be. We know that last winter many of us had to pay a lot higher prices for electricity, and that's one of the reasons is because it was scarce, and then the higher prices kick in when it gets scarce. So the reason this is a problem for you and me is that a lot of new infrastructure will need to be built to supply this electricity. Who pays? The cost is very democratically shared among all the ratepayers in Delaware. When electricity supply is low, higher rates kick in. And who pays? All the ratepayers in Delaware. There are other data center issues also, but this is probably the main one. Our aim is not to shut them down, but to put guardrails around them so that we can enjoy many of the fruits of data center activity without the pain associated with some of the negative effects. SB 205, as you see on your screen here, will simply require permission of the public service utility to use large amounts of energy. The PSC is also directed by this bill to favor renewable energy sources. The next item is HB 233, which will require that high energy users pay a higher electricity rate than the normal residential user. A few years in looking at item number 3, a little background here is a few years back, Amazon was approached about the possibility of putting solar panels on its expensive new roof. They thought that was a good idea until they learned that they would have to pay for expensive infrastructure upgrades that could then be used by many future users. Amazon didn't like the idea of supporting everyone's electricity infrastructure for years to come, so they said no thanks. The potential bill is being studied right now by Senator Hansen's stakeholder group on energy. This bill would allow new businesses coming to an area to pay just a portion of the projected expenses instead of the whole amount. Then we have an unnumbered bill, which is being planned, and that's called plug-in solar. And that would allow us as individual residential owners to buy solar panels for our balconies or backyards that just plug in to our normal electrical system and help to provide at least some of our electricity. This type of solar is used extensively in Europe, and that's pictured there on in the slide with the solar panels along the balcony. And of course, we will continue our ongoing struggle to bring offshore wind to Delaware, first through the U.S. Wind Project and then through a Delaware project. But of course, as you know, these things have been they've been stopped for a while. So we're looking forward to continued progress in that area, however, and we look for support from you all. End of presentation.
And now we go to Tanya for criminal justice.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm Tanya Whittle. I'm speaking on behalf of the Criminal Justice Group in the absence of Chris AC, who leads the Criminal Justice Group. As you see at the top, our group focuses on legislation that tries to bring about just, effective, equitable, and transparent systems that foster public trust at all stages of the criminal justice system. So we're talking about policing, the courts, corrections, and that includes reentry. There are a lot of bills that are already introduced and that are being worked on that our group is interested in. And of course, we're always looking for more people to get involved. But I'm going to speak with you about just a couple of bills that are really priorities of this group this year. So at the very top, Senate Bill 124. This is a bill that's focused on trying to improve the expungement process to make it where individuals that have a criminal record and have served their sentence are able to have their criminal record sealed so that they are better able to get a job and reintegrate into society. There was legislation passed, a few years back, and there have been some improvements to expungement for people in the state. However, there are a lot of barriers still, roadblocks, and so this bill is intended to reduce some of those barriers. In particular, for those that aren't aware, in our system, there are felonies, there are misdemeanors, and then there are also traffic offenses, which we don't typically think of as crimes, but sometimes people will have a criminal case that involves a misdemeanor and a traffic offense. And so currently, if someone has a offense that involves something that is in Title 21 and not just Title 11, the criminal code, then is also in the motor vehicle code, it creates this complication where people aren't able to get their records cleared. And so this bill that's been introduced is trying to clarify that a traffic offense should not be a barrier for people getting an expungement of their criminal record. Um, in addition to that, there has been the recognition that although we need to have punishments in place in our criminal justice system as, a part of our effort to change behavior, the reality is that over time in our criminal justice system, we've developed a reliance on fines and fees as a way of financing our criminal justice system. And this is incredibly problematic for a number of reasons. One, when we finance our criminal justice system on fines and fees associated with crime, that indirectly means that we have to rely on crime to occur in order to fund vital criminal justice systems. So that in and of itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then in addition to that, there is, research, but just so many stories here in Delaware where people have gotten a low-level offense and they get a fine. That fine is the punishment, the monetary punishment of a couple $100s, for instance. But because we have built our laws so that we then add fees to fund our criminal justice system, people times were often paying more in fees than they were in fines. And so these two bills, HB 132 and 133, are a part of an effort to try to reduce the financial barriers for those that are low income and involved in the criminal justice system. So HB 132 is looking at trying to reduce some of the existing fees that people have tacked on to the fines. That way they just focus on paying their fines. And we're advocating for the necessary funds for the criminal justice system to come out of the general fund, because right now it doesn't make sense to pay for court security officers off of whether or not someone can pay $4 a month. That's a very ineffective way of funding these things. Similarly, HB 133, that's a bill that is trying to allow where the courts can defer or suspend fines and fees for individuals that are identified as low income through already means-based systems. So if someone's on disability, if they're already receiving SNAP, the courts would be able to waive these fines and fees for those folks. Senate Bills 57 and 58, they're also related to the courts in some way, but they come into play post-conviction. So in the state of Delaware, if someone is convicted, there are some means for people to contest a case. But the way that the laws are constructed in Delaware, it's actually really hard for groups like the Innocence Project to be able to look back at cases and say, hey, this individual, they did not commit the crime. Can we test the DNA? The way that the laws are constructed now, we don't actually maintain a lot of the physical evidence for long periods of time and allow for that DNA testing. So SB 57 is aimed at improving our evidence laws and allowing for DNA testing beyond the current statute of limitation. Like if it's, so many years, DNA remains the same. It's not the same as eyewitness testimony. And so it's trying to make it where we can use science to prove someone's involvement. SB 58 is similar, but it's really looking at how science changes over time. So recognizing that what was once considered, general knowledge in a field, with more research, we find that that may not necessarily be accurate. Currently, people that were convicted under law, such a, related to shaken baby syndrome, for instance, back in the 80s, the understanding of shaken baby syndrome has changed since then, but currently someone can't go back to the courts and say, hey, look, the science has changed, the understanding has changed, reconsider my case. It's just case closed. So SB 58 is not looking to just open up the floodgates, but to make things a little better. And then quickly, last thing I'll say is there's been a lot of work on police reform as well as probation reform in the state over the last couple of years. And the criminal justice group, along with many others, are working to continue those efforts. Um, with the police transparency and accountability bill, that there's not a bill number yet. There's still discussions on if there's going to be a cleanup bill or a next steps bill. And then in the probation field, although there is not a bill introduced and a number ready to give you right now, my understanding is that there will be continued efforts to reform probation, really focused on technical violations and defining what is a technical violation, what people can be reincarcerated for, or when other measures need to be taken instead of incarceration. And then
Okay.
I think it
Thank you,
goes
Tanya.
to Seal.
Yes.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm Seal Tilney. I'm the chair of the Healthcare Advocacy Committee. And with my colleagues, Peggy and Tanya, and I suspect those who will come after me, I do encourage all of you who are participating to think about which of these bills kind of speak to you, or which of these topics or initiatives speak to you, and consider joining your interest with ours. The extra leverage that you can get in working with the legislature and in working across Delaware is really worth it. Plus, they're really cool people on these different committees. So I am privileged to lead the healthcare committee, where our goal is on equitable and affordable access to healthcare for everybody. And I think you'll notice that the word equitable shows up across all of our portfolios. That's not a deliberate marketing strategy. It just organically emerges that a lot of what we do is try to make sure that government services are equitably distributed across the citizens or across the residents of Delaware. In the area of healthcare, these are some examples of initiatives that are already on the table and being considered in the legislature, as well as some broader initiatives that we anticipate there will be legislation coming out. And in addition to the legislation, we're also hoping to continue providing educational outreach to the community so people can learn more about different topics in healthcare. I think you'll all agree that it's a pretty complicated, frustrating field, and a little bit of information can help. The various news organizations that cover healthcare have done a survey of what are the top of mind issues in Delaware. Those range from the big picture, how the hell are we going to do, pardon me, are we going to manage costs within Delaware, and what can we do legislatively to have oversight of hospital and insurance company spending. You will see some efforts going on. In fact, some legislation has already advanced in the Senate yesterday to take the next steps in getting more transparency into how funding and spending streams work within the hospitals in Delaware. So that's a good step forward. Rural health, which you see at the bottom of this list, is our share of the $50 billion federal rural health fund that has just been released. We anticipate seeing a variety of bills coming out around that. A good deal of Delaware does qualify as rural for the purposes of rural health. And so everything from a medical school to wraparound services provided through HOPE centers, to IT infrastructure for healthcare. Many efforts will be funded through that program this year. Any of that's interesting to you, please consider getting involved in moving some of those initiatives forward. Medicaid, people often aren't aware that up to about a third of Delaware residents gets their health care through one form of Medicaid or another, from child care through senior care. And a couple of the initiatives that are currently on the table are around dental benefits. There's some reproductive health initiatives around Medicaid, and how the limited Medicaid funding that's available can best be distributed to Delaware residents. What's called the silver tsunami, the influx of people like me who, after a wonderful career in different places, choose to retire to Delaware and get involved here. As we get older, we have different needs. We have more intensive needs. How can the state's resources best support us? But in turn, how can we best support the state in providing those resources? So these are some of the areas that that we're going to be focusing on this year. In the area of behavioral and public health, addiction, and mental health services are on the table. Insurance reform, better access for patients, protections for payers. You know, we have pretty good payer protections in Delaware, but historically we haven't needed to worry about laws in other states that will, I'm sorry, not payers, providers. We haven't needed to worry about regulations in other states that might come in and adversely affect our physicians and doctors who perform, say, reproductive health services. So we're building out stronger protections for those. A lot going on. I couldn't be more proud to lead the group that is involved in lobbying for all of this, and I encourage you to join us. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Peggy. Come off mute, Peggy.
Okay. All right. Here, let me get myself organized. The first bullet point here, this is the committee on called Land Use and Transportation. And our first bullet point is about supporting the authority of the Office of State Planning Coordination. Now, this is not a department, so it doesn't have department status. So, you know, when they put out edicts, people don't always listen to them. I guess it's kind of like the 10 Commandments become the 10 suggestions. And this is the same role that the Office of State Planning Coordination has. They do a lot of research and develop fine-tuned opinions about how we should grow, but we don't always pay attention to them. If we were to put into one phrase the work of this committee, we might say that we want to direct growth into growth zones. And this is an official consensus that the League arrived at like 20 years ago when we did a study. Direct growth into growth zones. If we could manage this one undertaking, our committee could probably disband because of lack of needed activity. We have a wonderful Office of State Planning Coordination, which has cleverly divvied up the state into 4 levels of growth. And starting at the most populous and dense end of the scale is level 1, which is urban areas or city kind of places. The last level is level 4, which is rural. Levels 2 and 3 represent in between gradations. The problem, as you can imagine, is that a lot of people want to build homes out in level 4 where the land is cheaper. The land is cheaper at first glance, but when you factor in transportation and all the services that have to be provided, it's more expensive out in the Tulies. And it costs, the AAA says that it costs about $12,000 a year to have a car. That's for the cost of the car and upkeep and everything. So we want to avoid forcing people to have cars. So if we could all live in more urban areas where we could use public transit, we'd all be better off, wouldn't we? So the American Farm Institute says that it costs about $1.16 to provide services like roads, schools, and ambulances to sprawl areas for every dollar brought in taxes. $1.16 from $1 in taxes. So you see, somebody's got to pay that. On the other hand, for every dollar brought in taxes for agricultural land, It costs only 35 cents to provide services. Now, currently, the Office of State Planning Coordination makes suggestions about growth, but not all three of the counties take them seriously. And we'd like to see that change. Now, looking at the next bullet point, in about 1971, Delaware began state funding for open space and ag land preservation. If we were to adjust for inflation, the $10 million allocated for each program would be roughly $26 million today, yet funding is usually still at the $10 million level. The League supports $20 million per year for each program. Once this open space is lost, it's gone forever. The ag land preservation is of particular interest to many because it's a twofer. In exchange for an agreement to never develop the land, the farmer receives a portion of the value of their development rights. The portion thing is kind of complicated, and I can talk to anybody about it later if you're interested. Even if we didn't need the food, we all get tremendous pleasure from observation of the bucolic landscapes that fill our field of vision as we travel from one part of the state to another. Of course, the open space program usually provides access to active recreational areas, and that's a wonderful benefit, although sometimes the open space is simply to preserve important wildlife areas. And of course, services are far cheaper to provide for farmland and open space, as I mentioned earlier. At the next bullet point, we talk about increasing the loss of property and infrastructure due to sea level rise. About 20 years ago, DENREC held a series of meetings and on sea level rise, and at the very end, they came up with recommendations, and Chad Tolman was a wonderful League member at that time who represented the League on this committee, and I was his understudy. So I came to all the meetings, and at the last day when they were making recommendations, they voted to not require disclosure of in a real estate transaction regarding the possibility of sea level rise due to climate change. And of course, that movement against that recommendation was led by the realtors who didn't want to give a negative spin to their product, which was, selling properties. But we need to talk about those kinds of things. And so far, no one's talking about them. We need to have public conversations about retreat. Shall we retreat? Shall we pay people to retreat? Shall we armor the coast by putting up rocks or walls like the Netherlands has done? We need to start those conversations. And another, I'm not keeping track of my time here, but so I'll make the last two pretty short. We want to support the removal of parking minimums. That sounds pretty awful. Are we opposed to parking spots? One of our members says, well, I park every time I go out shopping. You can't get rid of parking spaces. We want to support getting rid of the requirement that you have to have a certain number of parking spaces. Each business would decide for itself how many parking spaces they were going to need. But right now we have a requirement for minimum parking, and it often just ends up costing the consumer more. And of course, it's an enormous It's an enormously bad use of space when you have a crowded urban environment and you're requiring a certain minimum parking. Let each business decide for themselves how much parking they're going to need. We want to support greater control of e-bikes. And I have an e-bike and I was in 2 accidents and I know it's an issue. So, and when they come afoul of pedestrians, it's an issue, not only then for the rider of the bike, but for the people that they might run into. So we want to work on controlling those things. So we'd love to have you join this group. We'd love for you to be chairman of this group, but we do look at a lot of really interesting topics. So onward and upward.
And now we have John Sykes, who will talk about natural resources issues.
Thank you very much. When I was approached earlier this year about taking on this committee, I saw nature and I said, that's lovely. I love nature. So this is all about nature. And if you look at the top line here, it's protecting our air, land, and water quality and something called coastal zone. The first bullet here is to preserve and protect Delaware's watershed and wetlands. Not too many people are aware that our first state is the last state in terms of water quality, that 97% of our streams and rivers are impaired. 100% of our estuaries are considered impaired. We have a lot of work to do with that, or on that area. And speaking of rivers and waters, there is something called a coastal zone. Many of us came to Delaware because of being able to live and play along the coastline here. Well, some years ago, there was an act that was called the Coastal Zone Act that was created to protect and keep safe and for public health an area of land that starts along the coastline, that starts up abutting the Pennsylvania border and goes all the way down the river and the bay and into the Atlantic down to Maryland. It's called the coastal zone, and that represents 20% of Delaware's total landmass as well. And it's designed to minimize the amount of development of heavy industry development that goes in. Peggy was talking about data centers, and there is a data center that is being looked at to go into the coastal zone up around Delaware City. And she talked about the use of energy, but it's also going to use a lot of water and can have a deleterious effect on the water quality in that area. Another area that we look at here is around extreme heat. Again, not widely known, that extreme heat is the worst natural resource or natural disaster worldwide and in many places in terms of harm to people. That starting around May and then going through the summer and sometimes into September, we have very hot days and weeks on that, and the people that suffer the most are typically the elderly, those that have preconditions on it as well. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm working with SEAL and the Healthcare Committee on that to look at how we can be better at preparing for these events and then ensuring that people have a place to go when it does get very hot, so we can cut down on the number of on the mortality and the morbidity in that area. We have two bills that we are looking at that came over from our last session on this, and this has to do in the area of waste and pollution. Senate Bill 130 focuses on polystyrene foam products, and the difficulty with this foam is that it's recyclable, but you it only is recyclable if you drop off these big chunks of foam at the solid state drop off points. You cannot put it on curbside as well. And that represents, by volume, 10 to 25% of our solid waste is with this stuff. And it doesn't go away. It just gets, it's like forever. It just gets compacted. The good news is that this bill was started last year. It has passed the Senate. It has gotten through committee in the House and is now getting ready to go to the floor for a vote. So that's extremely good news. Second one is something that's called Skip the Stuff as well, and that's House Bill 111. And many of you have seen when you get to-go food that you'll get a small packet of utensils, typically plastic, that automatically comes with the food that you pick up. And sometimes you're given that when you are just sitting down at a table as well. And this bill is designed to require that the restaurants, etc., do not automatically put that in the bag with your food, but it's available by request of the customer on that. Again, trying to reduce the amount of plastic that gets into our landfills that never goes away. So that's it for this area. And if you love nature and would like to work with this, we would welcome your participation. Thank you.
And now we go to Jack Young to talk about redistricting.
Thank you very much, Linda. As I think some of you may already know, the League of Women Voters supports the creation of an independent redistricting commission. SB 14 would amend the Constitution to establish an independent redistricting commission. Now, under our state constitution, this act would require the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members elected to each house in the General Assembly in the current session, which ends this June, and then approval in the next General Assembly, which would follow the November general election. The benefits of an independent redistricting committee are, among others, first, it creates a fair process for drawing the districts by providing for input from leaders of the two major parties in the Senate and the House, including the selection of 5 commissioners in a nonpartisan process from across the state. And it creates advisory commissions in each county and the city of Wilmington. And finally, provides public hearings to maximize our input as citizens, political parties, candidates, and current office holders. The bill expands the current standards and criteria for redistricting by disregarding incumbent addresses, limiting the use of party registration and voting history, requiring compliance with Voting Rights Act, includes the counting of incarcerated individuals pursuant to legislation from the last General Assemblies, and most importantly, preserves communities of interest. That is, groups that have common interests. For example, in the coastal zones that John and Peggy talked about, there is a common interest in the environment, in zoning. Those interests are important when we look to representation. Third, SB 14 will benefit citizens by providing fair districts centered on their communities. And it benefits candidates and our representatives by creating more coherent districts centered on communities of interest that are geographically more compact. Finally, as we look to the 2030 census, AI will make the map drawing process more transparent and easier for all of us to design fair and appropriate districts. SB 14 has been unanimously approved by the Senate Executive Committee and will now go to the floor of the Senate. And when passed, will then go to the House for its vote. An approval of SB 14 is critical in this session because of this requirement that it also be approved in the next General Assembly, which will take us close to the 2030 census. Thank you. And now I
And
turn
now
it over
it's,
to Linda Barnett for social
yes, it's
justice.
my turn. Now, I cover this sort of catch-all category called social justice. A lot of bills fall into this because they don't fall into any of the other issues. But it's a critical one, and we are concerned about equity, as Seal mentioned, individual liberty, and social justice for all. And I just wanted to reflect back on Jack's discussion of redistricting. We know that that has been a topic of great interest around the country. Fortunately, here in Delaware, we only have one federal district, so we don't have to worry about a map for our representative at the federal level. But going again to social justice, the bill that we wanted to highlight here is another one that is of great interest around the country and refers to the treatment of immigrants and individuals who may look like immigrants, and especially who look like illegal immigrants. SB 58 says that our state law enforcement personnel cannot stop someone just because they look like they are an illegal immigrant. They can't stop them, they can't question them, they certainly can't arrest them. Dealing with immigration law is a federal issue, and we want to leave it at the federal level, although certainly that impacts the state. But in this particular case, we're looking at the actions of our state law enforcement personnel, and we don't want them to get involved with trying to do anything about federal laws. By having a law like this, we are hoping that this will preserve the trust that should exist between the immigrant community and local law enforcement. We don't want individuals to be afraid to approach local law enforcement when they have encountered a crime, when they have seen a crime or it has affected them, because they're afraid they might be reported, to federal officials. So we see this bill as being a necessary one so that justice and safety applies to everyone in our state, regardless of where they were born or what their immigration status is. So we're hoping that everyone will help us get this bill passed. We now move to the next portfolio. Jill Iskowitz will talk to us about voting and elections.
Hi, my name is Jill Itzkowitz, and I chair the Voting and Election Committee, and we meet the first Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. We review legislation that focuses on voting, but we also discuss ways to educate voters and increase voter participation. Delaware has a high rate of voters that are registered, but a low rate of the participation. Delaware has all their election rules in their constitution, which is very unusual. After some recent Delaware Supreme Court rulings, it's evident that we need to change the Constitution rather than enacting laws. We had enacted some laws for vote by mail, but the Delaware Supreme Court said you just can't do that. You have to change the Constitution. And to change the Constitution, you need a 2/3 vote. In the Senate, the Democrats have a 2/3 vote, but in the House, Democrats are one representative short for 2/3 majority. So we need one Republican to vote for the bills I'm going to review. The Delaware Voting Rights Coalition and the League, we're focusing on two representatives, two Republican representatives that are more moderate. We're focusing on trying to get Representative Mike Smith of the 22nd District and Representative Hensley. I held a meeting at my house last month with Mike Smith and some of his constituents, so I know his views on these bills. The first bill is SB 2 to safeguard the process of early voting. Delawareans really like early voting. I mean, it's very popular. And this bill passed the Senate, and it's pretty sure that it'll pass the House. Republicans like early voting also. The second bill, SB 3, is to establish no excuse absentee voting. Right now, to get an absentee ballot and vote this way, you need a specific rule. You need a specific excuse. What this bill would do is allow everyone to vote absentee if they would like. Also, as part of this bill, it says that there will be permanent absentee voting for people who have disabilities or in nursing homes or excuse me or can't get out for voting at the polls. Mike Smith had said he will vote for this bill. The part where to allow for no excuse absentee voting, but he does not like the permanent absentee list. I know we're having discussions with the sponsor. I'm not sure that the sponsor will amend the bill, so it just includes no excuse absentee voting. The next bill, HB 88, is for same-day registration. Right now in Delaware, you can register up to like 24 days before the election. And this bill will allow voters to register on the same day as Election Day. I know that Mike Smith was not for this, mainly not because of fraud, which other people have said, but he did not like the fact that poll workers would have to register voters on the same day that they're doing their poll work. So we'll see what happens with that. This bill has been around for a while, but never seems to have traction. And the last bill, HB 180, permits felons to vote after completing their sentence. Right now, we have restrictions. Certain felons cannot vote. So this would allow all felons to vote if they completed their sentences. So that's our voting and election laws. And
All right.
go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Jill. Well, we have time for some questions if there are any. Marge Johnson had agreed to look for questions and see what they might be. Marge, do we have any questions?
There aren't any at the moment in the chat.
Wonderful. We've covered everything and now everything is crystal clear. Well, I want to thank all of our presenters. I think hopefully we have made the issues clear, but we know we've thrown a lot of information at you. And so please take note of my email address, which is here, advocacy, LWVDE@gmail.com. If you have questions, which I can then pass along to the right person to answer them. We'd also like you to be aware of the General Assembly's website, and the address for that is shown on this slide. If you want to dig deeper into the content of any of the bills that have been discussed, all of the bills are available for review at that website. And the final thing I want to talk about is our advocacy core. And as the presenters have made their spiel, many of them have mentioned urging that you consider joining them in their committee, joining our advocacy core. This gives you an opportunity to have a front row seat in our advocacy work. During our meetings, we discuss the bills that have been filed. We base our positions on policy positions that the State League and all the members have approved, and we can't go beyond that. But within that framework, there can be differences of opinion, and we have lively discussions about the bills. And it's mentally stimulating, and it's interesting, and it's fun. So I hope you will consider becoming a member of our advocacy corps. You don't have to know when you join whether you want to specialize in any of the issues that have been presented here, although each of our committees need members who do specialize because it helps. We can't all be experts on all these subjects. We need people to specialize in the different areas. But please consider joining us. And again, if you are interested in learning more about that, send me an email at the address shown. I keep seeing some things popping up in the chat box. Marge, do we have any questions that you'd like to bring up?
No, let me see. Maybe Mike can address
Sure,
the
yeah.
last question
Hi,
that came
I
up.
am not Representative Mike Smith. Don't worry, this is a question that gets asked to me 3 to 5 times a day. I am Michael A. Smith. He's Michael F. Smith. So no, I am not the representative from Hockessin.
And there is, Carol put in a reminder about the book discussion on January 28th coming up. That's in the chat if people want to join that book discussion.
All right. Well, thank you very much for everyone for attending. And again, as mentioned at the beginning, this session will appear in on our league YouTube channel once it's processed, and you can find that link at our state website. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.